Welcome to the Sales Compensation Show, where we share the latest sales performance research, insights, and solutions through in-depth discussions with industry experts. So put that spreadsheet away, grab a beverage, and enjoy the conversation. I'm your host, Justin Lane. It is my pleasure and honor to welcome to the Sales Compensation Show, Vincent DaCosta, currently the Global Director of Sales Compensation at Databricks. Vince, welcome to the show.
Hey, Justin. Good to see you like always.
Yeah. So, Vince, I think you've been in sales compensation now 13, 14 years in some capacity or another. For the folks listening to the show that may not be familiar with you, can you tell us a little bit about your career and background in sales compensation? And then what's your current role look like at Databricks?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I like to tee up that I have a very kind of diverse and unique background, right? I started back in the day as a sales comp admin for a large Fortune 35 company, and kind of grew into kind of understand the basic principles of sales comp, right? Several years there, ultimately managing the sales compensation team, and then decided to move into kind of consulting, right? So I went out and worked for one of the larger vendors in the space, did a lot of current future state type assessments, really kind of broadened my skill set outside my prior industry, and got to know, multiple different verticals and multiple different ways of slicing and dicing kind of sales comp and that. So I thought that was great. From there, shifted into a different consulting, more of an agnostic type view, right? So working with a lot of different clients for, again, assessments, but then vendor selections, and really kind of setting them up for success in order so that they can implement and roll out and focus on change management. And then after COVID, I have two little ones, right? So if the traveling started again, I wanted to maybe hone it back a little bit. Stay at home, really kind of cherish these kind of years right now, right? So got back in the industry, went and worked for a company, and took over the entire kind of global sales compensation program from A to Z, of course. Really built that up, set them up for success. And then now I'm at current role, as you alluded to, Director of Global Sales Compensation here at Databricks. And I guess to summarize my role today, I guess if I was to break it down to kind of like three key areas, right? The strategy piece. So with Databricks, actually, let me take a step back. For those that don't know who Databricks is, the company's been around for about 10 years. The founders are these brilliant academic engineering folks, right? The creator of Apache Spark, Delta Lake, ML Flow. And they kind of took all these ideas along with kind of their education and background and wanted to form the company. And I guess, what I was saying is, we're really kind of the world's first and only lakehouse platform in the cloud, right? So we take data warehouses and data lakes and really offer an open kind of unified platform focused on data analytics and of course, the hot topic, artificial intelligence, right? So Databricks, fantastic company. We're kind of sums down to my role, again, as I alluded to, kind of three key areas. So strategy. As the company has kind of grown, right, we're really focused on strategic initiatives to set us up for success, not even just today, but then ultimately when we go public and beyond. So there's a lot of planning, a lot of key internal projects that I take the lead on. From an operational perspective, which is kind of like my bread and butter, right? Really looking at the commission program from A to Z, from data integration all the way to end user experience. How do I kind of help direct and lead the team to really make it an efficient execution engine, right? To make sure that at the end of the day, everyone is happy, internal and external stakeholders. And then lastly, that falls underneath me is the systems, right? So we have an ICM platform today, which of course go through implementation, testing, and then the day-to-day administration, analytics and reporting.
All right. So our paths have crossed. We've worked at a similar company. Earlier in the season, had a chance to interview Maria, who we both work with. And we got to hear about what she's put together, her company, in terms, around sales compensation administration. I think when we worked together, this idea and beyond, you did it, certainly afterwards as well. This idea of assessing the sales compensation administration Do you feel like that's something that people could do on their own, like a self-assessment, or better served using an external consultant or a well-crafted methodology? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a tough one, right? Personally, and maybe just based on my experience, right, is that I think it's always best to have a fresh pair of eyes to take a look at your program, and to your point, maybe a third party type consultant, an agnostic type lens there, right? I think the difficulty that a lot of companies get stuck in is that like they don't have the internal expertise, right? Or they've been doing the same process manual and so on, year in, year out, and not really kind of focusing on like, hey, how can we automate and optimize our focus here, right? I think also, data is ever changing, right? So as companies continue to grow or M&A activity, data becomes more and more disparate, right? And again, the collection of information is usually a big pain point for a lot of companies. But again, if you're in the weeds and you're just kind of doing a monthly, semi-annual basis, whatever it may be, it's good for someone to come in and say, well, let's take a moment to pause. Let's talk through kind of your current operations, and then have them kind of help point out those areas of opportunity, right?
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, whether think about different domains across life, whether it's sports or fitness, nutrition, health, your financial well-being. Oftentimes it is hard, right, to get better at what you're doing without somebody else providing that strategic lens or view and giving you some ideas. One thing I think that's really interesting is, to anybody that's been in the consulting world, is that you get to see a lot of companies over a short period of time. And so you get to see this wide spectrum of the good, the bad, the ugly, and start to put some best practices in the bag and then share those back out with other folks. When it comes to assessing a compensation program, why don't we start at that front end of the process? Like you mentioned, data integration. Let's go one step up, maybe ahead of that. Like the ability to collect change, maybe around whether it's reference data or the sales compensation plan itself. How can people get really good at this idea of staying ahead or abreast of change in the plan, change to quotas, territories, even HR data for folks? Like what could be automated versus what do you need to build like a process around to get good at it?
Yeah, so it's interesting. If we look at kind of the sales comp or sales performance management space, right? I think part of it is that, there's a lot of interconnected teams, right? Organizations have, say, maybe a sales strategy team, a plan design team, sales operations, sales commission team, and that, right? But if they're not all kind of working together and kind of streamlining and really focusing on what's the end game, I think that's where a lot of companies have issues and concerns, right? From a data integration perspective, right, I typically break down in like 3 key areas, right? People information, transactional information, and then quotas or targets there, right? Typically, not one team internally owns one piece of that, right? So as a sales commission team, right, you're working with multiple stakeholders to focus on that. So the intent would be to, what works best for the sales commission team to actually administer, and then to your point, work upstream to say, hey, if we were to get this data in this type of format or this type of timing frequency, or hey, here are these issues that we continuously have, how can we fix them upstream? So by the time it gets to us, we're able to administer more effectively and efficiently, right? And it's really a continuous process, right? It's not like you can just change it in one day. And that comes back to the assessment piece, right? You can go through an assessment, nothing's going to change overnight. It's always a marathon type approach, right? You have various areas of opportunities, and then how do you attack that going forward?
Yeah, I love you brought up the idea of it's a continuous battle, on the data side. I've always felt, I've used the analogy in the past that if you don't strive towards this idea of continuous improvement, you're just going to go backwards. You're rowing against the current constantly. And if you ever just kind of say, "Hey, we've achieved, we've arrived," you're heading the wrong direction as you're proclaiming victory. Data quality is a big issue for a lot of companies. And I think, the more comp teams that I talked to over the years, the more I heard this theme of they kind of just deal with it. They make the changes on their side, kind of in isolation to get the data correct, to pay people correctly, but not maybe push back on source systems to get it right. What have you seen be effective? Is it just do you put the QA, QC process in place after they've thrown it over the fence? Or do you try to find root causes and work with upstream data to make it better? What have you done, and then what would you recommend to people?
Yeah. Listen, if you want to be ineffective, spend hours every month trying to close the books and then retroactively making adjustments, then so be it, right? But as I alluded to before, I do think it's a larger cross-functional partnership inside a company, right? So when there are data integrity issues, typically the sales commission team is like the most downstream team, right? And from what I've done in the past is, first you have to identify those issues and concerns, right? Typically you see some repeat patterns. Maybe it's an enablement piece for the sales users not entering in information correctly, or maybe it's a data feed situation from the source system, further upstream. Once you identify that and raise awareness to those folks that may own your CRM or HCM or wherever it may be, then you can actually put in more validation type processes, right? And what I've seen too is, let's take, a CRM perspective, right? As an opportunity works through kind of the sales motion, the journey, it's got to hit certain thresholds or certain points. And every validation it goes through, by the time you have a close one opportunity, it should be pretty much perfect, right? So then it gets flushed out, goes to sales commission, and then you're done. But if you don't have those checkpoints in place through automation, semi-automation, whatever it may be, you're going to have, again, those continuous issues from a data integrity perspective.
So Vince, where does your team sit in the organization? Are you guys in sales or in finance?
We actually sit in the finance department.
The finance side. Okay. So you work with your sales counterparts throughout the process. So over the years, you've seen a lot of companies, and you've probably seen some where it sits maybe in sales ops, sales or revenue operations somewhere, and other companies where the comp admin function sits within finance. Do you have an opinion on where it should be? Or is your team placed in the right place at the right time at your own organization?
Yeah, great question. So I guess my perspective is that it's not necessarily where a sales commission team would sit. I'm actually more of an advocate of like a separation of duties, right?
Okay.
So, for example, in one of my experiences, sales commissions did sit within sales to the point where, up the hierarchy was the sales leader, right? So we were administering like our boss's boss's boss conflict. Now, is that maybe the right thing? Probably not. What I would say is that, as we were talking about before, kind of those cross-functional teams, I actually do think it's better that the teams sit within a couple different departments so that, the accountability is still there, but then there's no conflict of interest too, right? Every organization, every industry is going to be different, but that's kind of my opinion.
That's an interesting way to think about it, this idea of checks and balances. Maybe the folks designing the plan are not the same people administering the plan, or not the same people getting paid from the plan, type of thing, to make sure that there's some separation there. I've always been a big advocate of this idea of execution and administration kind of being, and I say owned, right? But it's kind of, again, it's a collaboration, because I think when you think about sales compensation plan design and then the administration or execution, it rarely sits on the same team. And it doesn't fit well within like your typical legacy, business function. It is by almost definition cross-functional between kind of these silos of sales, finance, HR, because they all have a different perspective and kind of lens that they're viewing sales compensation through. Okay. Let's get back to administration. We talked a little bit about data integration. How automation, is the goal fully automated, or is there an 80-20 rule you like to follow? Or where is that kind of, is there a lot of diminishing returns in trying to automate everything? How do you think about data automation on the inbound side?
Yeah, I think you probably just hit it there, right? No company's ever gonna get to full automation, and part of that is, within the sales comp world, right? There's always like different governance, different exceptions, retroactive adjustments. I don't care how smart our artificial intelligence ever becomes, right? It's never going to capture everything. So to your point, that 80-20 rule of automating as much as possible, but then having, an error report, exception log, whatever it may be, and then have some human intervention to actually take a look at that and make sure that everything is captured correctly, right? So yes, I do think there is a point where you're like, okay, we're pretty good automated, we're saving a lot of time. Now let's spend that to be a little more strategic and dig into the data to focus on the quality, right?
Yeah. So as you progress throughout your career,
mm-hmm.
how was your thought process as to this idea, right? Analytics, metrics to put in place, reporting that you're, producing for various stakeholders. How has that evolved? What reports and analytics do you do today? Maybe you weren't thinking about 13 years ago when you first were sitting in seat.
I think a lot of it maybe focus on is you're always in the continuous planning cycle, right? So as we partner, say like today in our plan design team, right? They're doing their cost forecast modeling and tweaking kind of the plans and different modifiers and, sales finance to make sure they're taking that and that we're aligning to budget and that. Well, what I guess I never really did in my past, I'm trying to be more cognizant of going forward is, okay, once we close a performance period or fiscal year to date, how does that actually marry up to what we thought 6 months ago, 8 months ago, right?
Okay.
But not just that though. It's like, you may have those type of comparisons, but then what are you going to do about it going forward, right? Like how are you going to take that and integrate it to future plan design or tweaks or modifications too?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like you don't run into many companies that even do an in-month, accrual and reconciliation. I think this idea that you're describing of doing kind of this ongoing continuous reconciliation to the budget and then trying to, forecast forward from a comp spend and give people that information to be able to make decisions, right? Do we need to pivot, make a change, stay the course? It's really important. And again, there's very few companies that I think have that kind of that metrics package and ability in place. So many people are just struggling with the basics of, hey, let's get payroll out on time and get it pretty close, to where we think it should be, type of thing. So that's great. Crediting and calc a big issue for you currently, or is that what the tools, the systems are taking care of?
So I guess, without getting into specifics, we are in a heavily complex situation, right? So I think what has been very beneficial is leveraging our third-party system, right? Okay. I couldn't imagine trying to do all this in Excel or within an Access database or anything like that too. So like where I'm at today, the value of a third-party system is like invaluable, right? It has really sped up the process, having complex plans and then leveraging automation to actually administer properly. But yeah, crediting calculation, I think really when you're kind of peeling back the layers there, right, is what is more out of the box system functionality versus customization, right?
Okay.
And you never really want to have the system kind of dictate your plan design because the plan design should be over encompassing, incenting, motivating, and so on. But when you're looking at systems, how do you kind of focus on the out of the box functionality versus spending that time to customize and building technical debt, essentially? All right.
Yeah, that's kind of, over the years I've been on this pendulum of, when I first started, way back at the Alexander Group, certainly our perspective was that the technology should never dictate what the plan design is, and then I kind of swung to the far side where I'm like, yeah, but we live in this pragmatic reality of we want to automate it, so that we have an audit trail, so we have a repeatable function that we could go back and recreate if we needed to be, and the more kind of human and manual touches, the more potential for introduction of error. And now I've kind of landed in this kind of happy middle of where I agree with you right now, the idea that no system should kind of dictate what we do with the comp plan design, to best align with the strategic goals, motivate people. But the availability and quality of the data, certainly has some impact. If the data doesn't exist, like, well, why are you going down this road or this path? If the data is of poor quality or a bad timing, you're just kind of setting yourself up for some failure down the road.
And that's where, it is very important that the plan design team, wherever that may sit within the organization, it is, working or providing a seat at the table with the administration team, right?
Yeah.
Because you can come up with the perfect plan on paper, and then you toss over the fence to the administration team, like, whoa, I can't do this, or I can't get this done in this point in time, and so on. So again, it comes back to collaboration, which is something that I've seen more and more in my experience, right? Like, the companies that are very successful have that tight-knit collaboration group so that things are as seamless as possible throughout the entire planning process.
Yeah, no, again, I think that's, I think over the course of this first podcast season, we've talked about the idea of best practices. Do they exist? Do they not? I think this is one where it kind of falls under the idea of, it is a best practice, right? To collaborate between strategic planning teams, operational execution teams, to make sure that it is hand in glove. Because, and again, as we've done the work, talking to a lot of companies, assessing kind of this process, I think you probably found the same thing that I have. That's just rare, where the comp administration team feels completely isolated and cut out from the strategic planning initiatives around what to be done. And I'm like, well, where are they getting their data from to make these decisions, right? They should be coming to your team and saying, here's the analytics package that we need to see, is the current plan achieving what we wanted to? Is it, or not? And, when we look to the future, where are we getting this source data to do so?
And Joseph, I couldn't tell you how many assessments I've done where, we would do like a 2-3 day workshop, get everyone in the room, pre-COVID essentially, right? And the conversation
virtual room now,
occurred, virtual room now, but even beforehand, whenever it was, right? Those first few hours of just bringing in those cross-functional stakeholders were like eye-opening to like everyone in the room, and it was just mind-boggling. But that comes back to the original point. It's like having fresh pair of eyes or a third party coming in, that kind of stuff. Sometimes you actually are able to solve your own issues and problems just having a facilitator there, right? And I really felt like those workshops were like tremendous value for folks out there. So,
no, I think I don't want to discredit the value that the consultants bring to the table, coming from a long line of consulting, right? But I would often state this in the room where I said, "Do you guys already have the answer, or at least 80% of the answers, right, in-house?" But this idea, what you just said, and I want to dig in just a little bit deeper for people listening, but bringing in to a single room all the stakeholders in sales compensation, and then thinking about some process chains, business processes, and like what we're talking about now is the process of, payroll process of calculating pay based upon a sales compensation plan on a repeatable basis. You guys pay monthly, quarterly, both?
It's a combination of performance periods. Yeah.
So we'll call it monthly, right?
Yeah.
Bringing everybody in the room and then walking through that end-to-end process. Yeah, it was always eye-opening. It was a surprise at first and then expected later after you've done a few. That people just had no idea what happened downstream of them in a process, or people downstream had no idea, the rigmarole or the work effort being put in upstream to them. They kind of just saw their little slice of the process and felt like that any inefficiencies or lack of ability to get better at the process was limited because they were doing the best they could do, but they were a little, dependent upon what was happening upstream, and then they were passing stuff downstream type of thing. But it was amazing, like, to listen to people just not know, kind of within their own organization. Big organization, small organization, kind of didn't matter, type of thing. So that's something maybe that people could think about. Whether it is a third-party facilitator or a consultant that specializes in this type of work, or if you have a group internally, like a PMO or something, just to get stakeholders in the room and just start diagramming out, right? What are the steps? What are the handoffs? You're looking for duplication of effort. How many? Let's talk about this.
Yeah.
How many times, Vince, did you run into companies that maybe had a semi-automated process using a third-party tool, and then maybe a very manual process done by another team using more rudimentary tools like spreadsheets? Did you ever encounter something like that?
I've had a few clients out there where they actually had a third-party system in place. And then as we were digging through, they were also performing all the manual calculations
in parallel
as the same in parallel, right? So like you're spending X amount of money there, but you also have X amount of people hours that you're focusing on too. And it was just kind of mind blowing, right? Like, hey, whoa, you spend all this money to implement, get a system and tool in place, but you're doing the same exact thing on the side. What's the value that you're adding there?
Pick one. Like I don't.
Yeah. You got to rip the Band-Aid off, go through it, and figure out how to quality check, right? Not parallel process, but quality check.
I think people. I know. One of the core reasons that I had heard over the years, and again, I'll ask for your thoughts on this as well, is that a lot of people during that third-party implementation maybe didn't do quite as robust of testing as they wanted to do. And so, the people who had been doing it manually for 5, 10, 20 years trusted, what they were doing more than they trusted this third-party system. And so, any thoughts on like when people implement a third-party system, is there a right or wrong way to go about testing, and how do you gain the trust of all the stakeholders involved?
Yeah, well, I guess first, what's like the root cause, right? And typically it's like two key areas. One, it's either, lack of time, right? Implementation always gets squeezed or always goes down the time because upstream processes push things, right? Or the second one is just, you just don't have expertise on people knowing what to test, right? And a simplistic comp plan versus a highly complex comp plan, you should still have every single testing scenario, every single acceleration band, every single modifier. It's really the testing strategy is coming up with predetermined use cases and then expected results, right? So I guess even taking a step further, kind of overarching data integration piece, you have some type of ETL connection possibly, right? You would perform SIT or system integration testing, just to make sure the data actually flows through, right? Once that flows through, that's great. At least you know it's going through. Now, is it working properly? That's where you kind of shift to UAT or user acceptance testing, right? And typically within a system perspective, and I think most people hopefully know this, it's basically two phases, right? Crediting is the order translating into appropriate crediting, modifiers, any type of modifications that might happen there, and then the calculation piece too, right? Because your crediting may work, but your calculation may not work. So then you kind of have to back in like, well, what do I need to fix there, right? So as you're going to hit those pieces throughout the testing journey, again, you want to make sure that you have all the predefined the various scenarios and expected results, so that you're literally uploading your batch, crediting, calculating it through, checking the results, and be done and move on to the next one, right? But I don't think a lot of people put in that prep work beforehand, and they just kind of do it on the whim, and that's not the best, because you're inevitably going to miss something, right? You really need to kind of sit down, think things through, have a plan of action, and then have everything kind of prepped, ready to go, upload, and then test.
I do want to shift gears a little bit. So you manage a team currently, yes?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So for the people that maybe are more junior in their career, as a manager of a comp admin team, is there any different skill sets that you're looking for currently that maybe you weren't looking for in people to bring on board? And it just came to mind as you taunted the future AI and its ability to do all this good stuff. And I took a note to come back in 5 years to see where we were. But do people, are you looking for people with more like hard skills, soft skills? Like, has anything changed? If somebody wants to get involved, or they're thinking about how do they get to Vince's level, what do they need to do?
So I think there's multiple pieces there, right? I think the first thing is, if I were to fill a role, right, I would be pretty concise on what I would be looking for. Now, there's so many different type of roles. There could be more of a system type analyst, right? Maybe someone a little more technical behind the scenes, a see the comp plan design, and they're able to translate it into a FRD and then ultimately build in a system, right? You're going to have, again, more technical skill set. I don't expect that person to get in front of the VP of Sales Finance and explain, what our payments are or why we have certain adjustments, right? I think as a manager of folks or a leader of folks too, right? As you kind of progress in the career ladder per se, it is really kind of managing your team, right? You start to become less of an individual contributor, right? Not spending your day in spreadsheets or configuring day in and day out, right? But you are then managing those folks that are into the weeds and that kind of stuff too. So it's that evolution of having a pretty solid base of technical skills, understand how plan design works, how quota setting methodologies work, how a system operates, all the way through to communicating it out to the sales payees, right? Like a business admin. But then as you grow, how do you take those skills and experience and coach your folks so that they can then step in and kind of be that face, right? And honestly, it takes time, right? Like it's experience. 1 year in, you may start to understand the landscape, but I really think you kind of need to spend time at a company, growing company, working with different systems, working with different people to think about plan design. I think more of a diverse experience in your background. I actually think you become better as you continue growing your career there.
Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna sum up some of the ideas that you talked about today. Then I want to ask you for any other kind of lessons learned or takeaways that you want to share with folks for people, again, teams and people that are looking to get better at sales compensation administration. But you mentioned these ideas. One, collaboration, right? There has to be good collaboration across the different stakeholders in business function. And I love, the phrase seat at the table. The comp admin team should have a seat at the table, like in the planning exercise, and have some input and, be part of this idea. But always collaborating with data owners and stakeholders up and down. You talked a little bit about, QA, QC process of data, which is important. I think a lot of people struggle. There's never any, I've yet to talk to somebody that says, hey, we don't have enough data. I rarely talk to people that feel like they have perfect quality data. Type of thing. So I like this idea of QA, QC throughout the process. You're checking coming over the fence, you're checking crediting, you're checking calc, type of thing to make sure it stays whole throughout. And then I think this, for people that are thinking about implementing a system, making changes to a system, probably, once you have a system in place, thinking about this robust test package, edge cases, exceptions, even for simple plans. Don't just say, hey, we think we got it, right? Let's put some pressure up against it and see if it really is going to work. And, lastly, we, kind of the core theme we're talking about, this assessment, right? Of kind of thinking about the process, how do people get better at it? And your thought is, it's valuable to have like a third party eyes, on the process, to kind of, one, elicit out ideas within the organization, but to bring some experience maybe that folks internally don't have to be able to get better at it. I think those are all fantastic ways for people to think about the comp administration process, and whether they own it, they're on the team, or they're on the other side of that collaboration, to think about how can we as an organization get better. Any other thoughts or, kind of low-hanging fruit that people maybe could think about to get better at sales comp admin?
Yeah, I think everything you just mentioned, we could probably spend days talking about each one in depth, right? I think one that we didn't touch on a little bit was operating model. And that's something that I've seen over the years too. And again, it's a consultative answer. It depends on the company, ICM system you have in place, and so on. But operating model, I think, is so critical because you either have gaps within your type of administration, or you have duplicative work, right? Or, I've seen some companies where they have people that are dedicated to like one special part within the administration. Now, there are schools of thought, right? Should a comp admin team be fully functional from end to end, like really understand everything holistically and support their organization? Or depending on maybe the size of the organization, having a subset group or team that only focus on like you're building a car, right? It's like you fix one thing and then you go on the next, and you keep appending things until you have a fully finished car there. I think from long-term career path, having that end-to-end type experience is very critical, regardless of where you go, whatever company size, right? And I think that's not necessarily low-hanging fruit per se, because now you're talking about people, right? But keeping that top of mind for long-term success for administration, operating model is very critical to get it right and focus on that too. So,
as you describe it, I think like Ferrari versus a Ford, right? The idea that one person kind of builds the car, from start to finish by hand, versus one person does some very small piece of the puzzle, then hands it off to the next person kind of in this assembly line fashion. And the idea of, do you have a bunch of parallel processes where people are kind of doing end to end, or do you have a bunch of sequential processes where people are handing it, to the next person in the sequence? And depending upon the business context, one might be a better solution for the other. But regardless, everybody involved should understand the end to end, what's happening throughout that process, so they either can fill in for somebody on vacation or, out sick, or have an understanding what their impact is upstream and downstream to their piece of the puzzle. But I like this idea of that, people should at least minimum understand the whole process, but maybe be able to do the whole process, type of thing for their career growth and types of things. Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. All right. So we're nearing the end of our time here together. I've enjoyed the conversation thoroughly. This is the type of stuff we used to do all the time, right? We used to talk about this on a daily basis at one point in time. And I don't think about it as much, so it's fun to talk about it. So the first question is, is there anybody in the world of sales compensation or general sales management that you'd like to take out to lunch?
That's interesting. So this one actually may come to fruition. We'll see. I just got approval. I was asked to be a panelist and speaker again, which is nice. I Road to Work this coming in Chicago in August.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And the gentleman that I think will be joining me is Rick Butler. And I would assume you probably cross paths with him. And then, I never had a chance to formally meet him. Maybe he'll listen to this podcast one day. We'll see. But, he's got a very diverse background, right? And again, I have a diverse background, but I think he has a little bit of sales, a little consulting, some HR benefits. I think he's been sales comp for several years, right? Like, I would just love to pick his brain, right? Because when you kind of live different lives like that throughout your progression there, you pick up tips and tricks, being on one side, right? Being on sales and being on the administration side, being, consulting. So maybe when I'm out at Road to Work, I'll formally grab lunch with them. So hopefully that was an easy answer for you.
I actually got to sit next to Rick at dinner a number of times now. And I'm looking around my room, and it's actually quite the tee-in right to the next question, because I believe he is an author as well. And I was trying to look around to see if I could spot the book to make sure he is indeed. But I'm pretty sure if you go on Amazon and search, he may be the author. I'm trying to think if it's a pen name, though.
See, he's a jack of all trades, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. You talk about a wealth of experience at large enterprise companies running really big, complex teams. Great guy to be networked with and to be able to hit up for, bounce ideas off of type of thing. All right. So final question. I like to read, may or may not be self-evident as I sit here in a library surrounded by books. For people, any general books, I always ask related to sales or sales compensation, they want to recommend to people. And if nothing comes to mind, any books that people could go read to get better, at their job or as a person or at, what we do.
Yeah. Actually, and I probably got mine here too. Give me 1 second. Let's see here. Hopefully I didn't steal this from Maria, because I think Maria actually recommended this, but it's by David Kelly. And I know you can't see it from the blur, but the book on incentive compensation management by David Kelly. So when I got into consulting, Maria actually recommended that book for me, and I've had it on my bookcase here. And I think for someone that, whether you're junior in your career or you've been in the space for years, I think brings you back to the basic principles within our industry, right? And I found that very valuable. And actually now I'm going to have to refresh my memory and read through it again. So, but that would be one of my recommendations.
Yeah. It's not a long read. I think it is one of the few books that's kind of dedicated to the administration side. And he does do some deep dives into technology as well. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of his background. I knew Dave when he worked early days at Calidus as a, kind of one of their original solution architects, and developer of the system. And for those who have ever met Dave, he's the guy in the Hawaiian shirt. And he is a frequent attendee at the World at Work conferences. So I think I'll be there this year, but I'll look for you. Yep. I'll look for Rick. I'll keep an eye out for Dave if he's there or not. But Vince, I wanted to thank you so much for coming on the show today. Again, really enjoyed the conversation. Great catching up with somebody that I know. And it was my pleasure to have you on the show.
Excellent. Thank you, Justin. I appreciate the invite, and hopefully I'll see you in a couple months here.
The Sales Compensation Show was brought to you by Forma.ai, the world's most advanced sales compensation solution. To learn more about how Forma.ai makes sales comp more valuable to your business, visit Forma.ai. Find us by searching for Sales Compensation in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, or anywhere else podcasts are found. And make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. On behalf of the team here at Forma.ai, thank you for listening and stay smart out there.